Welcome back to another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. And as always, joined by Browns beat reporter Scott Petrak with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and of course, BrownZone.com. Scott, great to see you again. And, well, much different show than last week, I anticipate. We were breaking down a very difficult Week 1 loss for the Cleveland Browns, but they rebounded with a 23-3 victory over the Jets last night. So, Scott, let's start there with your three major takeaways from the Browns' first victory of the season.
Yeah, maybe I'll give you four. Just the fact that they got the win, right, is big. You can't afford to go 0-2. And I think the stat is since 2002, teams that start 0-2, less than 12% make it to the playoffs. So if that's your expectation, you can't dig a hole, especially with the schedule that the Browns have coming up. OBJ was phenomenal. Made the plays that John Dorsey traded for him, expecting those types of plays. The one-handed catch, which was so reminiscent of the big, famous one-handed catch he made against the Cowboys years ago. Same stadium, same part of the field. The long touchdown catch and run that cemented the game. If he makes plays like that, the Browns' offense has a chance to be explosive. Number 3 would be Baker. He just doesn't look like the Baker we saw over the second half of last season. It's not time to panic, but it is worth taking note of and wondering why that is. Is our defensive coordinators adjusting to Baker? Is the offense too much different from where it was last year because you had the Todd Monken factor? Now Freddie's in charge and not just using Todd Haley's offense like he did last year. What's going on with the accuracy? So just the overall Baker struggles. The numbers still were okay, 300-some yards, but inflated by the Beckham catch and run for sure. And then the defense. Obviously, the Jets were missing their top 2 quarterbacks, by whenever Simeon went out. But you still only give up 3 points on the road. They did a good job overall against Le'Veon Bell, even though you could tell that they were concentrating on him. But you saw glimpses of what this defense can be. So those are my 4 major takeaways.
I thought the offensive line early in the game looked at least a little bit better. Tough to look much worse than they did in Week 1 or, in that dress rehearsal. And I know that caused a lot of concern, but they seemed at least a little more comfortable yesterday. Not sure if you agree with that. And if you do you think that's maybe a product of running the ball a little more early on?
I do agree with it. I thought the line was better. That was one of the positives, especially on that side of the ball, along with Odell. And I'm not sure. Part of it is that Greg Robinson didn't get thrown out, so that helps. You have your left tackle there the whole time. Part of it is you weren't trailing, so you never felt like you had to drop back and pass every snap, and therefore the Jets could bring a lot of pressure, and you could keep them off balance with the run. And then, they went to Nick Chubb earlier. I think he had 22 touches overall, and it probably would have been more, but he got banged up a little bit in the fourth quarter and left for a few plays. And Dearness Johnson came in and got the ball, I think, 2 or 3 times in a row. So it always helps to run the ball, and it keeps the defense somewhat on its heels. You take pressure off. So I think all those contributed, and I just think that the offensive line played better. Technically, technique-wise, I think they were better. You have more cohesion the deeper you get into a season. These are the 5 guys working together as a unit for the first time because you have Eric Kush. They only had the 8 games with Greg Robinson at the end of last year, so it's still a work in progress, but I think it's definitely a positive sign that the line played better.
Safe to say, and to go back to your Baker Mayfield point, that this wasn't necessarily a game where he had to be great in order for the Browns to win, and as a result, that may have masked a couple of his deficiencies. One of the things that continues to come up about him is that maybe he's hanging on to the ball too long. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I think that's such a complex issue that you can't just say, well, he's afraid to throw it or he doesn't know when to get rid of it. It's all of it. It's, are you diagnosing the defense correctly? Are you reading whether it's zone or man and where the open guy is going to be? And if you're not, then all of a sudden you have to hesitate because the guy you're going to throw the ball to is covered or isn't where he's supposed to be, whatever it is. So there's a lot that goes into it, but the bottom line is, yes, he's hanging on to the ball too long. Yes, that puts extra stress on the offensive line. Yes, that disrupts the rhythm of your offense because you expect him to throw it at 1, 2, 3, get rid of the ball, and instead it's 1, 2, 3, pump, pat the ball. So all that's involved, and I think the first issue is Baker's got to do a better job recognizing what the defense is trying to do to him. And I'm sure defensive coordinators spent all offseason, especially the guys early in the year, right? Greg Williams and Dean Pease from Tennessee knew they were going to face Baker. So all offseason they're thinking, how are we going to stop this guy? What can we do to change? What can we do to disrupt him? Because he was so good last year. And a lot of it's trying to confuse a guy. You mix up when the pressure's coming. And the other factor with Baker that some quote-unquote traditional 6'5" pocket quarterbacks don't deal with is Baker's trying to find the right balance of when to sit in the pocket and when to get outside the pocket. And Tom Brady doesn't have that issue because he just sits in the pocket as long as there's a pocket. There's plays where Baker has protection. The line holds up, and he still wants to get outside. And that's fine if then you make a big-time throw from outside the pocket. But it also reduces the field. You roll out to your right, you're not throwing back to the left. So it's a half a field. And I thought we saw a couple of times yesterday when he was in too big of a hurry to get outside the pocket. And then the other factor is the accuracy. And I think that'll come around. I think Baker, throughout his life, has been an accurate passer. But I think through a couple of throws yesterday that seemed like easy throws that he just missed. And you just can't have all these kind of hiccups together. You can have one hiccup, right? You can have two hiccups. But when they all come together, it results in a day where he only completed, I think, 53% of his passes. He just didn't look crisp. They're 5 for 23 on third down over 2 games. So I think all that kind of, you lump that into one thing and say, Baker hasn't taken that jump that he needs to take in year 2, because if they're going to be a playoff team, Baker needs to play like a top 15 quarterback, and he's probably borderline there the way he's played the first 2 weeks.
Picking these things apart, that's kind of what we do, so I guess we're allowed here. But do you get the impression that maybe, just maybe, as a whole, we're being a bit too harsh on what we saw yesterday? And I say that simply because a win is a win. In the NFL, clearly there are no style points.
Sure.
It's a win in prime time. It's a win on the road. And, this team is only a couple of years removed from a season where they didn't win at all. But do you think above all else, that comes as a result of the expectations heading into the season?
I think that's exactly it. If you take this win and put it in 2016, 2017, which obviously didn't have any wins, 2018, people would have been happy with it, right? The Monday or Tuesday, as it is this week, but the day after reaction wouldn't have been the same. The group text messages I'm on wouldn't have had the same negativity. Obviously, people are excited for the win, but it's always, but this, or we still need to do this better, or Denzel Ward missed tackles, whatever area you want to focus on from a negative standpoint. And I think it all comes down to the fact that people spent the last 6 months, maybe even 9 months, expecting this team to go to the playoffs. And if you expect to go to the playoffs, then you have to play better than you did against the Jets. And obviously better than you did against the Titans, but better than you did against the Jets, especially when it's just human nature to look forward to, well, next week, the Super Bowl losing Rams come into town. And after that, you go to Baltimore, who's 2-0. And actually, the next 5 games are against 2-0 teams. So when you start spinning it ahead, you go, well, yeah, a win is great, but would this performance have won next week? And the answer is probably no. So I get that you should enjoy the win, and that's all that matters to Freddie Kitchen and the Browns. But they know, and they better know, and I think they do know, that if they're going to go where they want to go, they're going to have to play a lot better than they did last night, especially offensively.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And defensively, there were a lot of guys that certainly stood out. Myles Garrett most definitely being one of them. And one of the things he mentioned in the preseason is that he certainly wants to be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. How far away do you think he is from being in that conversation consistently at this point?
Well, first, it's interesting. Myles has been saying that since they drafted him, right? That's his goals, and they're huge goals. It's Hall of Fame, and he even said it's not only Defensive Player of the Year, and I'd forgotten he had said this, and he reminded us a week ago or so. He goes, I want to be MVP. I know it's not easy for a defensive guy to do, but that's what I want to be. So he sets his goals high, which is fine and great, and he knows he has that kind of talent. But to answer your question, I think he's in that conversation. I think he's already there. I think that comes with being the number 1 pick in the draft. having the profile that he does. And it's a big profile, and it gets bigger when you go in ESPN, The Body Issue. And when you have a 3-set game on Monday Night Football. All that stuff lifts him up to kind of that stratosphere in the NFL where he will be considered. I think when odds makers say who's going to be Defensive Player of the Year, he's on that list. So once he's in that discussion, then you have to talk about, okay, well, who's his biggest competitors and what kind of numbers does he have to put up to get there? Because it's so much about numbers. Now, the Browns have to win. They can't be 4-12. Myles Garrett is not going to be Defensive Player of the Year. But if they're 10-6 and win the AFC North, that's one box checked. If he gets 18 to 20 sacks, that's another box that now he's in that realm because that's what he does. He rushes a passer. And then you compare him to, I think, his number one competition, and that's Aaron Donald, right, of the Rams, who I think has won it back-to-back years. I think. You might have to look that up. But I know he won it last year. I know he's a force. I think it would be unanimous. People would say he's the best defensive player in football and has been for the last 3, 4, 5 years. So that's who Myles Garrett's going against. And actually, we'll get to see that head-to-head Sunday night because they'll be against each other, and it'll be fascinating. And I know I'm looking forward to talking to Myles this week because there's a ton of topics to discuss with him. But being on the same field as Aaron Donald is one that I know motivates Myles, and he'll be amped up to go prove something to the country and that, hey, side-to-side comparison, who had a better game? Now, he can't block, Aaron Donald, but he can do what he can on his side of the ball. And the final point on this is Myles has to be careful. He's played 2 games, and he has 3 15-yard penalties. Right? He struck Delaney Walker in the face after a play, and he had 2 roughing the passers yesterday. And we can argue about whether or not putting your whole body weight on a quarterback should be a penalty, and, are you allowed to take a half a step before you hit a guy, and all those things. Now, how high can you hit him, and the strike zone's so small. But those looked like penalties to me last night. And Myles Garrett, especially in a primetime game, can't afford to build up that reputation of being quote-unquote dirty. I don't think he is. I don't think that's who Myles is, and not that I know him great, but I think I know him a little bit. I don't think that's him, but I think he's trying to play with an edge this year and has crossed the line 3 times now, and you got to be careful there because humans vote for this, and I think some voters will be leery of voting for him if he continues along that path.
I want to stay on that topic for just a minute because Booger McFarland made this comment on the television broadcast last night about some of those hits that were deemed roughing the passer penalties. He said, look, back in my day, you would have gotten a pat on the helmet and said, nice work. So it's something that a lot of these guys are going to have to adjust to, but that's also, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a judgment call by the white hat who's sitting behind the play, throwing the flag on that play. And if that's the case and it's a judgment call, I think that's a really difficult thing for defensive players to have to do, but they're going to have to adjust to it. And you're right, because at the end of the year when they vote on these awards, not every person voting on this award has watched every single game to sit there and say, you know what, those flags, a good chunk of them are somewhat egregious. Yep. All they see are the amount of personal foul penalties assessed on the same guy.
That's exactly right. And they see the primetime game where he gets 2 of them and might have broken Trevor Siemian's ankle. I mean, that look gruesome. I haven't heard the results yet. I know he's getting an MRI, so it's probably not broken, but there's got to be serious ligament damage, I would think. So all that stuff you said is correct, and it is a judgment call. And there's plenty of calls in this league where you scratch your head and you go, oh, my gosh, I can't believe they called it. There was one against Denver's Bradley Chubb that cost them the game or went toward costing them the game Sunday. There you go. How can they make that call? And Myles was on the wrong end of a couple of those last year. That one in Oakland where they blew the whistle and the ball's bouncing around, somewhere else, and it would have been a fumble recovery for the Browns. So I get the frustration aspect, but these rules have been in place for a few years now. Myles has played under these rules. He needs to know that. And to me, it would have been, and I've never sacked a quarterback live on Monday Night Football in the NFL, but he should know enough to not land all 262 pounds on Trevor Siemian in the end zone. I just think he needs to know better. And then the one on the sideline, I think was more borderline. But the way Siemian came up, it looked worse. But he also really landed and crunched the guy. And that's what the NFL's trying to take out. We can argue about whether they should try to take that out of the game, but that's what they're trying to take out of the game. They don't want their quarterbacks to get hurt. They get hurt anyway. Drew Brees gets hurt. Ben Roethlisberger gets hurt, where they're not vicious shots. So you have to eliminate those vicious shots when you can. And I think Myles knows better and just didn't act better Monday night.
Again, you're dialed into the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast with Scott Petrak, and we're going to come back around to this week's game against the LA Rams. We're also going to come back to that Roethlisberger injury as well, because I think to some degree that might affect expectations as well. But I want to stay with the defense for another moment here. Damarius Randall, of course, did not play because of the concussion symptoms on Monday, and that's probably something that we didn't notice as much against a team like the Jets, who are down to their third-string quarterback. But how problematic do you think that could be if these concussion symptoms continue to linger with Damarius Randall? Because if he's not there, as you alluded to earlier, you have 5 straight games coming up against teams that are 2-0 right now.
No, that's a great point, especially against this high-powered Rams offense with a lot of targets out wide and a lot of deep threats there that they have. You know, Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, and you can go down the list, and Jared Goff, you know, at the helm. So the absence of Damarius Randall would certainly show up more in that type of game and against that opponent. So they need him back. And with concussions, it's so hard to tell, right? I mean, we saw him Friday after practice, and reporters talked to him, and he's fine. He looks fine, right? But it must have been a hit in that practice that Saturday he reports to the facility and has concussion-like symptoms, and they test him and he has a concussion. So you just never know. You never know if it's going to last a week, 4 days, a month, or you're going to have to take the year off. You just don't know. So I would say this, Damarius Randall's a borderline Pro Bowl guy in a contract year, and I expected huge things out of him this season. So if he were to miss any extended amount of time, I do think it would be a blow for this defense. They have some depth there. Eric Murray, Jermaine Whitehead, the rookie Sheldrick Redwine, who probably isn't ready for a big-time role yet. But what would add to the severity of the Randall injury is that Morgan Burnett left yesterday's game with a quad injury. And the broadcast had it. He's walking off the field at the end of the game with Freddie, and Freddie says something to him. He goes, yeah, it's a quad, and wasn't a great look on his face. So let's assume he misses some time. All of a sudden, if you're down your starting 2 safeties, a position of strength and depth is no longer that way. And all of a sudden, you're scrambling back there, and maybe TJ Carey's got to move from nickel back to safety. So the short answer is they can't afford to miss him for long, and the absence would begin to show up, I think, Sunday night against the Rams.
Well, let's talk about Sunday night against the Rams. That's going to be a pretty cool atmosphere downtown. Busy for sure. Yeah. I mean, the Indians are on Sunday Night Baseball, and, of course, the Browns had the Sunday night game against the Rams. How early do you have to get down there to secure your parking spot?
Yeah, I'm leaving right after this. No, I'm thinking, I don't know, the game's at 8 something, right? Kicks off at 8. 4 seems like obscene to get down there early, but it'll probably be in that ballpark, between 4 and 5. Yeah.
And it's going to be a lot of fun for the city. Clearly, it's going to be jam-packed down there. But offensively, what are some things that really have to change for the Browns to come out on top on Sunday night against the Rams?
Well, overall, it's more consistency, a better rhythm. We saw it against Tennessee. They had 2 drives, and that was it. Last night, I thought they sustained more drives. They didn't finish them, but they had a greater number of drives, and that was a step in the right direction. But it starts with Baker, right? Especially going against the Rams, like you mentioned. You're going to have to score points, right? 23 points is probably not going to beat the Rams. I mean, I know New Orleans and the Rams played a real low-scoring game the other day, but feels like an anomaly. So let's say you got to score 31 to win. Your quarterback's got to be pretty good. And he can't turn it over. Baker's got 4 picks in 2 games. And he just needs to be sharper all around, reading defenses and throwing the ball. So that would be number 1. I think how you diffuse some of that Rams potency on offense is by giving Nick Chubb the ball. And you brought it up before, and I'd like to see him continue to do that. I get that this is a passing league. I get that your shiniest superstars are out wide in Beckham and Landry and Callaway when he comes back. But it just feels like you control the game more when you're able to run it and when you're able to have success. And I feel like with Nick Chubb, the Browns should be able to do that, should be able to run the ball. Now, the Rams have a good front, but I'd rather Aaron Donald be making a tackle for a 1-yard loss than hitting Baker Mayfield for a sack and an 8-yard loss when, you could hurt Baker. So I want to see Baker better. I want to see Chubb, a slightly stronger commitment to Chubb. And then Freddie. If Freddie's a play caller, I thought he was better week 2 than week 1, but not where he needs to be. There were some head scratchers. I didn't understand why Baker was dropping back to pass with 2 minutes left, up 20. That made no sense. He winds up taking a sack. I didn't get that, and Freddie got asked about it after the game and said, I didn't think about taking him out, and we were trying to convert 3rd and 8. Well, I'm not sure that that's the right answer in that situation. But so he needs to do a better job calling plays because we know Sean McVay with the Rams is going to do a great job calling plays because it feels like he does every week. So I think Freddie has to get on that same level of innovation, imagination. He needs to get there with Sean McVay, and that's going to be another step because he was not there these first 2 weeks.
And I want to take a look at the other side of the ball here as well. I think the easy answer to this question would be Myles Garrett for sure. So we'll take him out of the equation for this next question. But defensively, who do you think is going to be under the microscope on Sunday night for that Browns defense outside of Myles Garrett?
Yeah, I think it's the cornerback group. And I'm going to start with Denzel Ward. Number 4 pick in the draft in 2018. Played great as a rookie. Went to the Pro Bowl. Has not been good the first 2 games. Gave up a couple of big plays in the opener. It felt like the only time the Jets were able to complete a pass more than 8 yards was Robbie Anderson running an in route against Denzel Ward. And maybe that's what the defense was giving him. Maybe he was playing him off into the middle coverage, but it felt like Denzel Ward was the guy there every time they made a big completion yesterday. That's not a good sign for your top corner. And he missed a bunch of tackles. Every time it felt like a guy was running on the edge, Denzel was flying at his feet and missing him. So I expect him to be better. I think he's a big-time player and a big-time talent. I don't know if he's worried coming off the concussions, I think he had 2 last year. I don't know if because he missed part of the preseason with an injury, if he's still fighting through that. But he doesn't look like the Pro Bowl corner he was last year, and that needs to get remedied when I mentioned Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. So because they have so many weapons, it's not only Denzel. It's Greedy Williams, the rookie, who's played well in the first 2 games. It's TJ Carey, the nickelback. It's Terrence Mitchell if you go 4 wides and you need a 4th corner. So I'm really going to look at that cornerback group, and it starts with Denzel Ward.
All right, I'd mentioned we was going to bring this back around here to the Ben Roethlisberger discussion for just a moment. He, of course, is done for the year.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to what you think about how that affects the expectations for the Browns. And I know that sounds weird with a quarterback missing on a totally different team, but it seemed like going into the season, there might have only been a few people talking about the Ravens, but a lot of people seem to think that the Browns' stiffest competition to win the division would be the Steelers. They're 0-2. Now they're without Big Ben. Do you think that affects the expectations at all?
Well, I think it does. Because, number one, you remove perhaps the biggest roadblock to the Browns in the last 16 years is the Steelers, but mainly Big Ben. I think he's 22, 2-1. I think those are the numbers against the Browns since they drafted him in 2004, and the Browns, for no apparent reason, had taken Kellen Winslow at tight end instead of the quarterback from Ohio. But that's for a discussion for a different day when we're talking about the biggest Browns mistake since they came back. But the point is, Ben's out of the way. The Browns now have a better chance to take 2 games from Pittsburgh, right? And I think at the start of the season, I had them splitting with Pittsburgh. Now I think they should sweep Pittsburgh. So does that mean 11 wins is now in play? And 11 wins should get you to the playoffs. Does it take a contender out of the AFC North? I think you can argue that point. Now, Mason Rudolph looked okay the other day against Seattle. Way too early to tell what he's going to be like. Steelers apparently like him enough because they go and trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick last night, give up a first-round pick, which is a weird trade, but it signifies that they're not giving up on the season and they're still about right now. So I don't know if you can write off Pittsburgh completely, but they don't look like they have the same explosion on offense without Antonio Brown, without Le'Veon Bell, now without Big Ben. So I think the overall thing it means is it's Browns versus Ravens for the AFC North, and we're going to see the first matchup 2 weeks from now in Baltimore. And that's a huge game. If the Browns were to win that game in Baltimore in Week 4, I don't care if they lose to the Rams on Sunday night. All of a sudden they have a leg up. And then they host Baltimore here late in the season. And if you sweep, that means all you have to do is tie to win the division. So I think it heightens. I don't want to write off Pittsburgh completely, but what it does to me is it opens a window and it puts greater emphasis on those two games against Baltimore.
Certainly gives us a lot to talk about next week when we preview that Browns and Ravens matchup. All right, Scott, we've come to that time of the show where we evaluate the golf game. We take a look at your golf shot, or in this case, your golf shots of the week. I had a chance to golf with you on Saturday. It was a lot of fun. You had plenty of great shots along the way, so you've got a number of different shots to choose from this week.
Well, you flatter me. But it did feel good. I played golf, I think, 3 times since we last talked, and I hadn't played in a month, so it feels really good to have been back out on the golf course. I hit a couple real nice rescue clubs. I can hit a fade just because I have always hit it in my life. So, Brentwood, one of those kind of tricked up par 5s where kind of lay back and it's a scramble, so I could go for it. We had a guy in position. I had a real nice rescue club around these trees, give us an eagle putt that we came close to making. I didn't come close, but the other 3 guys came close to making it, and we wound up settling for birdie. So that was the runner-up. But then I chipped in on our second last hole. It was a number 16, and we had just a little off the green, but was able to hit a little 60-degree wedge up there, and it rolled in the hole perfect. So anytime you hole out from off the green, that's probably got to be the shot of the week.
No doubt about that. All part of a very successful round. We didn't win, but we were still 12 under in that scramble, right? Something to be said for that.
Yeah, it was fun. You hit some good shot. You had a real good tee-ball on our last hole. It was a short par 4, and you drove it to the fringe, and then we almost chipped in from there. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great day to play golf. Good cause, right? Special Olympics of Elyria. So it was a lot of fun, and we've been trying to get out for a couple of months now, so that was the best part of it.
Absolutely. Hopefully Mother Nature continues to cooperate and we'll be able to get a few more chances to get out there before winter comes around. Scott, a pleasure as always, and look forward to doing this again next week.
Sounds good, Andy. Thanks, bud.
Thank you, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak with the Chronicle Telegram, BrownZone.com, and, of course, the Medina Gazette. That's going to wrap things up here on this edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you all again next week.